Let's give it up for Ben as he comes forward.
I've got a lot of devices and things to hold, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but you want to hold that? You hold that. All right, cool. Good morning. How's it going? You guys are making me nervous today. I don't know why, but I'm super glad to be here. We're going to give away some books at some point. Get that set up. That'll be fun. I'm going to put that right there. I'm going to down arrow to get to our first slide. Here we go. This is Tim Sanders. Tim Sanders wrote a book in 2002 called Love is the Killer App: How to Win Business and Influence Friends, which is obviously a play on Stephen Covey's How to Win Friends and Influence People. I was 23 years old when I read that book, which means I'm old. The big idea in the book, he suggests that we all have three things to offer the world: our knowledge, our network, and our compassion. And that resonated with me at a fundamentally deep level. And again, at the age of 23 years old, I knew exactly what I wanted to be about in life. And so for the last now 15 years, exactly what I have been doing and what I've been up to is both accruing and giving knowledge, network, and compassion. So by this point in my life, I had already kind of become a pretty relational creature. And today, I'm an absolute people junkie. So that network thing came pretty naturally to me. The compassion thing came pretty naturally to me as well, thanks to my bleeding heart hippie mother, who, when we would go to Whitewater in the 80s, God, I'm old. Does anybody still go to Whitewater? I hope not, because there are like Band-Aids in the lazy river, and like, there are no take-backs there, man. Like, streets are rough. But when we would leave Whitewater in the 80s, my mom, this was the kind of woman and human that she was and is today, when there would be a gentleman pushing a shopping cart with all of his belongings heaping over it, it wasn't a question of do I stop or not. It wasn't a question of do I engage this gentleman in conversation or not. Really the only consideration for her was do I take him home with us or not. And oftentimes the case was yes. There was always somebody living in one of our back bedrooms somewhere in our house. So that compassion thing I learned directly from my mom. As an adult, I've learned that compassion is more than just feeling sorry for, right? Or having that internal kind of impulse arise. Compassion is, in fact, action. Pema Chadron, she says this, that compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded, but it is a relationship among equals, namely the wounded. So that's what compassion is. Where I felt most kind of deficient at 23 was in this area of knowledge. So I spoke to network, I spoke to compassion, but it's this area of knowledge where I felt most deficient. And so I purposed myself to be a learner and to become a reader. And I fell in love with books thanks to this man and the book that he wrote. I may not ever be the smartest guy in the room, but I always want to know more than the rest. Hetty already did a great job of thanking Hannah and Maggie, but I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to thank you guys for imagining this, capturing the latent potential of this gathered community. So Hannah and Maggie, thank you for sharing your knowledge, your network, and your compassion with us. Can we say thank you to them again? So for about 8 or 10 years, I read mostly what I would call kind of career-specific books, right? They were these like kind of abstract, theoretical books. They were these kind of how-tos, if you will. They're what I would call career-specific. And that kind of reading worked for me until it didn't, right? Kind of like most things. Things work for us until they don't. And at the age of 32, about 7 years ago, I experienced pain, suffering, and loss really for the first time. Up until that point in time, life worked for me. I went to work on a Friday morning, and I came home from work on a Friday evening, and my life was fundamentally different. What seemed like an instant, I lost my marriage and I lost my family. But the reality is you don't lose your marriage and you don't lose your family in an instant. It's like falling asleep. It happens slowly and then all at once, right? So I experienced that all at once moment. And now all of a sudden these kind of triumphant, pious, success, overly practical kind of how-tos and a 7-step to this and an 8-step to that, they began to ring really hollow and untrue, and they ceased to work for me. And at that time, I started reading Renee Brown's Daring Greatly. And that book, what it did is it first broke my heart, and then it put it back together again. There's this big idea in that book, and she says this. She says, you cannot selectively numb. Actually, she says this. She doesn't say anything about numbing. She says, you cannot selectively numb emotion. You don't get to choose what you feel and what you don't feel. So I took that, and I just remember like walking through that season of life going like, okay, there's a choice before me. I can either choose to feel it all, or I can choose to feel nothing at all. And I'm grateful that somewhere I was able to dig deep enough to make a conscious choice to feel it all. And every day I wake up and I still make that choice. That's what each one of us is offered, is a choice to either feel it all or to feel nothing at all. So I developed this kind of philosophy of why I read what I read, and it's inspired by Dr. Brown, because she says this: if you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked on occasion, then I'm not interested in your feedback. So I took that and I adapted it, and as far as what I choose to read then and what I choose to read now, my personal philosophy is this: if what you have to say to me isn't deeply rooted in your own human experience, namely your suffering, I'm probably not interested. That's Shauna Nyquist. She's authored a book called Tangerines, Bittersweet, Bread and Wine, a little cookbook called Savor, and most recently, Present Over Perfect. She says this: the heart of hospitality is about creating space for someone to feel seen and heard and loved. It's about declaring your table a safe zone, a place of warmth and nourishment. We don't come to the table to fight or to defend. We don't come to prove or to conquer, to draw lines in the sand or to stir up trouble. We come to the table because our hunger brings us there. We come with a need, with fragility, with an admission of our humanity. The table is the great equalizer, the level playing field many of us have been looking for everywhere. The table is a place where the doing stops, the trying stops, the masks are removed, and we allow ourselves to be nourished like children. We allow someone else to meet our need. In a world that prides people on not having needs, on going longer and faster, on going without, on powering through, the table is a place of safety and rest and humanity, where we are allowed to be as fragile as we feel. The heart of hospitality is this: when people leave your home, they should feel better about themselves, not better about you. Chris Castro, thank you. Not just for what you did here today, but for who you are. Thank you for your gentleness and your humility. Thank you for loving your wife and children with honor and also with joy. Thank you for giving us the true gift of hospitality. Your giftedness is evident to us all, but your giftedness doesn't make us feel bad about ourselves. It makes us want to be better. So can we thank Chris again? We talk about this idea at Commonplace a lot. We read to know that we're not alone. I believe that to be fundamentally true. And if we read to know that we're not alone, then we certainly gather around the table for a shared meal for the exact same reason. And so I have the great fortune of getting to gather people around the table in the months and years to come, and it's going to be good. This guy is Joseph Meyer. He wrote a couple of books that influenced me greatly. The first is Search to Belong, and the second is a book called Organic Community. And in one or both of those books, I honestly am not sure which one at this point. It's all muddled together in my brain. He talks about the difference between a destination-based question and a journey-based one. Now, a destination-based question, it asks questions like, where are we going? And when will we get there? And how long will it take? And are we there yet? And if you have children, I have to go potty again. Again? Really? Okay. Has anybody ever had to do the pull over on the side of the highway and feet up on the door frame and the lean back and they're in your arms? You know what was really weird is when I had to do it for Justin. I mean, there were many road trips that I've leaned my 3 girls out the side of a car. Number 1 is better than number 2. I pity the fool who... So that's what a destination-based question is. And most of us, to be honest, we ask destination-based questions, right? But he suggests that maybe we should start asking journey-based questions. And essentially a journey-based question is this. The only question worth asking is, what are you hoping for? Right? Because a journey-based question, it doesn't have a specific point of destination in mind, but rather a horizon that you just begin to move toward. A destination-based question, they allow for kind of this cost-benefit analysis, right? And we get to determine, is it worth it? A journey-based question, it assumes costliness and risk from the very outset. It cannot guarantee the benefit on the other side of the cost-benefit analysis. You're either all in or you're not. But what a journey does is it does provide worth, right? And I can tell you that whatever journey that you're on, it's worth it. It's worth your time, it's worth your life, and it's worth the toll that it will take. This is Stephen Pressfield. Anybody read The War of Art? There are not enough yeses. Oh, yeah. Okay. I have 50 copies at my bookstore at all times. And my business partner, Joe, you're not going to hear this next part. I will give you one. You should read that book. I kid, Joe. But this is Stephen Pressfield. I read that book, The War of Art, 2 or 3 times a year. It's become a manifesto of sorts for many people that I know and love and respect. And I would like to love and respect you too, so perform already, okay? But not too long ago, I was having a conversation, a rather kind of animated conversation, to be quite honest, about whether this self-identified creative was like even actually a thing. So I was like wrestling with like, what is a creative? And I like sometimes am self-righteous and overly certain. And I was like, I had angst about like, what is this like, I'm a creative thing? Like, and it felt self-important. And it felt very bougie and avant-garde, right? To divide the creative haves and have-nots, right? It felt like, you're going to like this one, it felt like an opiate for the minority. You like what I did there? Get it? Creative haves, creative have-nots, opiate for the minority. That's all I got, so like, you might as well get your phones out, and from here on out, it's as good as it's going to get. But I'll admit, I had a critical spirit as I was wrestling with that, and I wasn't very like apologetic about the nature of kind of my inquiry. Like, is that even such a thing, right? To be a creative. And then I read this interview with Stephen Pressfield and this guy Jeff Goins, and Jeff asked Stephen, at what point can someone who writes call herself a writer? To which he replied, when she turns pro in her own head. You are a writer when you tell yourself you are. No one else's opinion matters. Screw them, he says. You are when you say you are. And in an instant, my self-righteousness kind of came tumbling down. So maybe you need to hear this and only this morning. You are a creative when you say you are. Right? So like maybe you leave here and you look yourself in the mirror and like you own that for the very, very first time. Right? What he's getting at is identity, right? And your identity isn't ultimately something that can be given or taken. It's yours. The only thing you can do is either claim it and step into it or not. So what does it mean to be a creative? I'm going to ask you some journey-based questions. What does it mean to be a creative? In that way that defies and transcends the tasks you perform in exchange for a paycheck or in exchange for applause. What is the raw essence and central makeup of such an individual? Who are they to be and who might they become in this life if given over fully to this identity? I want to personalize that for you. Who are you to be? And who might you become in this life if given over fully to this identity of a creative? What significance lies within this pursuit and what impact might be made on the world as a result? How does the practice of your craft add beauty? This is an important question. How does the practice of your craft add beauty and blessing to those who surround? Most people stop short, right, on that journey, and they come up empty-handed in that kind of process of discovery and explanation because their line of questioning as they process this creative thing is nothing more than kind of this theoretical kind of quandary and inquiry into whether or not I can make a career of my craft or my talent or my skills. What's at stake is not your profession, right? What's at stake is your personhood. And to violate yourself and your call and your vocation and your giftedness is the deepest kind of form of disrespect anybody could ever impose upon you. So ask yourself the question, who am I? Who am I really? Truly, honestly, instinctively, viscerally, wholeheartedly. And in response to that question, who am I, maybe an even more important question. Will I be me? Will you be you? The truest, fullest, most authentic version of yourself. And will you commit yourself to the never-ending, all too excruciating and joy-filled process of becoming? This process of becoming, it takes courage. But it's not courage in the way that you think it is. The packaging is what I would consider to be vulnerability. That's Renee Brown. We've mentioned her already. You have to read Daring Greatly. Like, you just have to. It's still to this day the most personally transformative book I've read in the last 6 years, and I've already told you why. She taught me that I cannot selectively numb emotion, and she taught me what vulnerability is and what it looks like. And she told me what vulnerability is not. So hear this and believe it. Vulnerability is not weakness, right? We've been taught and conditioned and modeled that vulnerability is weakness. But it's not. She says vulnerability is not weakness, and the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure we face every day are not optional. Our only choice is a question of engagement. Our willingness to own and engage with our vulnerability determines the depth of our courage and the clarity of our purpose. The level to which we protect ourselves from being vulnerable is a measure of our fear and disconnection. If you feel alone and disconnected and afraid, lean into this. Vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, it's our only accurate measure of courage. Vulnerability, it's our only accurate measure of courage. Courage, she says, starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. If you're brave with your life and with your work, you are going to get your ass kicked. She says that's the physics of vulnerability. The bravest among us will also know heartbreak. So if your heart's a little broken today and you're a little beat up, you're probably on to something. Keep moving. Don't retreat and don't give up. And please do not shut down and numb out. Right? That's Elizabeth Gilbert. Has anybody read Eat, Pray, Love? Read it. You guys are like, oh my gosh. Elizabeth Gilbert in that book are so much more than a Julia Roberts movie. I mean, she's got a great smile and all, but I mean, this is Elizabeth Gilbert. She has this book called Big Magic. If you haven't read it, read it. So as I'm processing through this, like, is there such thing as a creative? My gosh, I'm thinking about Wayne's World now. You guys remember Wayne's World? You remember when Mike Myers, his psycho hose beast girlfriend, he like can't get rid of her, and he's like, she gave me a gun rack for my birthday. He was like, I don't own a gun, let alone minigun that would necessitate an entire rack. You're welcome. So as I'm wrestling through, like, is there such a thing as a creative? And why is there this tribe of people that are kind of, not in a bad way, but kind of desperately trying to say, I'm different, I don't fit here, I need my people, where are they? Like, I feel alone, like all of that. I'm trying to wrestle with that. I figured out what binds you together. And it's what you're most afraid of. That's the thing that you all and we all have in common, is that we're afraid of the exact same stuff. And I should have known, because it's never like strength and bravado that builds community. It's always vulnerability, and it's always weakness. I heard a communicator say one time, like, if I were to ask all of you, like, how many of you have been to Disney World? And you'd be like, and you'd look around, you'd be like, cool, they've been to Disney World, cool, they've been to Disney World. But if I were to ask, like, how many of you have been touched by cancer? Fundamentally different connection takes place in the room, right? And there's instant solidarity, right? So that's what binds you as creatives. It's what you're afraid of. And Elizabeth Gilbert, in this book, Big Magic, she has the most fantastic and almost comprehensive list of the things we're afraid of. So she says this: let me first list for you some of the many ways in which you might be afraid to live a more creative life. Buckle up, I'm going to move through these fast. She says this: you're afraid you have no talent. You're afraid you'll be rejected or criticized or ridiculed or misunderstood or, worst of all, ignored. You're afraid there's no market for your creativity and therefore no point in pursuing it. You're afraid somebody else did it better. You're afraid everybody else already did it better. You're afraid somebody will steal your ideas, so it's safer to keep them hidden forever in the dark. You're afraid you won't be taken seriously. You're afraid your work isn't politically, emotionally, or artistically important enough to change anyone's life. You're afraid your dreams are embarrassing. They're not. Okay? They're not. You're afraid that someday you will look back on your creative endeavors as having been a giant waste of time, effort, and money. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of discipline. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of workspace or financial freedom or empty hours in which to focus on invention or exploration. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of training or degree. You're afraid you're too fat. I don't know what this has to do with creativity exactly, but experience has taught me that most of us are afraid we're too fat. So let's just put that on the anxiety list for good measure. How true is that, though? Like, who woke up this morning and was like, I am just right? Like, none of us. I changed my shirt 4 times because I need you to like me. Thanks. You're afraid of being exposed as a hack or a fool or a dilettante or even a narcissist. You're afraid of upsetting your family with what you may reveal. You're afraid of what your peers and coworkers will say if you express your personal truth aloud. You're afraid of unleashing your innermost demons, and you really don't want to encounter your innermost demons. I'll add this, but you must. You're afraid your best work is behind you. You're afraid you never had any best work to begin with. You're afraid you neglected your creativity for so long that now you can never get it back. You're afraid you're too old to start. You're afraid you're too young to start. You're afraid because something went well in your life once, so obviously nothing can ever go well again. You're afraid because nothing has ever gone well in your life, so why? Why bother trying? You're afraid of being a one-hit wonder. You're afraid of being a no-hit wonder. She says this: the universe buries strange jewels deep within us all, and then stands back to see if we can find them. So this, I believe, she says, is the central question upon which all creative living hinges. Do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? After reading this, I settled once and for all that there are, and there is most definitely, such a thing as a creative. But like most things in my life, the things that I'm railing and raging against are the things that I'm like wrestling with and trying to come to terms and peace with in here. Because the real question was not, are there such thing as creatives? The question was much more personal. It was, am I one? Right? So if you would, for just a minute, would you allow me personally to apologize on behalf of the countless number of people that have minimized you, questioned you, criticized you, sought to control you, micromanage you, discredit you, demoralize you, and monetize you on one hand, and then thoroughly use you on the other. We were wrong. They were wrong. That person, whoever it is, they were wrong, and nothing short of your forgiveness will do. So here I am, not only asking for your forgiveness, but I'm also asking for your permission. Can I join you? And I'm looking for your acceptance because I'm just like you. Feels like we're in like a smoky basement and having an AA meeting, right? Hi, my name is Benjamin Nockels, and I'm a creative. But not only am I a creative, we're going to double down here in the last few moments. Not only am I a creative, but I'm a creative entrepreneur. What in the hell does that mean, right? I'm a creative entrepreneur. That's Steve Martin. You might have guessed. Anybody grow up with their moms and their sisters watching Father of the Bride? Yeah. You remember that scene where, what's the daughter's name? Annie, right? Of course her name is Annie. George and Nina Banks, right? And Annie. And Annie has been traveling abroad, right? And she comes home full of life and flush in the cheeks because she's in love, right? And she announces her engagement to her now fiance, Brian, right? And she's just gushing about this boy. And the Steve Martin character is just like, he's having flashbacks to the time that, she's 4 and he's totally tripping out. And so they get to that point like, what does Brian do for a living, right? And Annie gets super proud and she announces, he's an independent communications consultant. And the Steve Martin character, George Banks, or what's the wedding planner's name? Franck. As Franck would say, George Bonks, right? We should sing, right? Everybody has a, we won't, but we should. We won't, but we should. We will later in the bathroom when we're looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, you are a creative. But he freaks out, right? And he explodes and he says, that's code for unemployed. He goes on to say, this is perfect. You meet an unemployed, amazingly brilliant non-ape that I'm going to have to support. I suppose I'm going to have to hire him and fire some hardworking guy with 3 kids because my son-in-law, the independent communications consultant, can't get a job anywhere else. This word entrepreneur, it probably means everything and it means nothing. And it's another one of those phrases and words that we just throw around. And it's even been laid at my feet and said of me, but I was never really sure that it was something that I would actually say about myself. That's Seth Godin. I hope you know who that is. I hope you get an email from him every day. If you don't, you should. A month or so ago, one of his posts came out, and he offered the most succinct yet kind of thorough explanation of what an entrepreneur is. And it might be like noon right now. I have no idea. Why is everybody going like this? Like, darn rash. But he says this. He explains what an entrepreneur is. He says there's the 14-year-old girl who hitches a ride to Costco, buys 100 bottles of water for 30 cents each, and sells them at the beach for $1 a pop. Scale that every day for a summer, and you can pay for college. Or the 7-time venture-backed software geek who finds a niche, gets some funding, builds it out with a trusted team, sells it for $100 million in stock, and then starts again. Perhaps we're talking about a nonprofit entrepreneur, a woman who builds a useful asset. Emily, this one's for you. Who builds a useful asset, finds a scalable source of funding, and changes the world as she does. The mistake that's easy to make, he says, is based in language. We say she's an entrepreneur, when what we should be saying is this: she's acting like an entrepreneur. Since entrepreneurship is a verb, an action, a posture, then of course it's a choice. And what do people do when they're acting like entrepreneurs? Number one, they make decisions. So whatever crossroads you're at today, make the decision, act like an entrepreneur. Number two, they invest in activities and assets that aren't a sure thing. They're on a journey, right? They persuade others to support a mission with a non-guaranteed outcome. It's the difference of costliness and worthiness, right? And number four, this is one of the most amorphous, the most difficult to pin down, and thus the juiciest. They embrace, instead of run, from the work of doing things that might not work. As far as I can tell, Godin says, that's it. So, that's me. My name is Benjamin Nockels, and I'm a creative. I'm a creative acting like an entrepreneur, and I think you are too. Thank you.
Ben, can you take some questions if anybody has them? It almost is, but maybe two questions. So, does anybody have any?
One or two? That's that awkward point where it's like, come on, I know you people. One or two, it'll be useful for everybody.
Yeah. Do you have a list of your must-reads somewhere?
My what?
Your must-read books?
No, but I can make one up. I tell people this, I get asked almost every day, what's your favorite book? I always say my favorite book is the one that I'm currently reading, because if it weren't, I would put it down and move on to something else. Don't waste your time on garbage. Stephen Pressfield would say, nobody wants to read your shit. He has a whole book titled, Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. But no, like I said earlier, I love memoir, and I run from theory and overly practical how-tos about as hard and fast as I can. There's something in them to be gleaned and learned, and there's knowledge to be had, and there's so much I don't know, but I'm kind of okay with what I don't know. And I'm just going to kind of jump in with both feet to what I know and what I believe to know, right? I was a preacher in a former life, and you preach the sermon that you most need to hear, right? That's what I did today. This was completely selfish, right? I need to hear that. And because I need to hear it, Henry Nouwen says this. He says, that which is most personal is most universal. So it's I just want to tap into things that are most personal to me, because chances are, if I do, I'm going to tap into what's most personal for you as well. So that's how I read. That's how I make book recommendations. That's how I curate what's in our store, on and on and on. I could go. Another question? Hetty? Oh.
Just for the couple people who may not know.
Well, it's not what this is about, but thank you. You want to talk about the difference between worthiness and costliness? That little bookstore at the corner of 13th and Walker, man, it's worthwhile. It's called Commonplace Books. What makes that place beautiful are people like you. What makes it meaningful are the stories that walk in the door all day, every day. It's a bookstore that has very little or nothing to do with books at all. It's about people.